Welcome back. Today we are focusing on the third party, the spoiler, or some people call them the home wrecker. And it could be a man, could be a woman. And as I've been discussing with our panelists this morning, it could even be a child. So these things affect a lot of people in society, and more often than not, we sweep them under the rug or hope they will fix themselves. But to some extent, they even get to a point where you need religious intervention. Sometimes you need legal intervention to just help you sort the mess that comes up or unfolds when a third party is involved in a marriage or in a partnership that is meant to be a lifelong partnership. So to help me dissect this matter is Kimathi Kamenchu, who's a family lawyer, as well as Reverend Nyakio Kamau, who's a deputy senior pastor at Sitam Ngong. Welcome to the show, lady and gent. I'd like us to define the third party. You've all had experience in this in your various professions, and I'll start with you, sir. What is a third party in your view?
Thanks, Trix. It's a term that has got no scientific definition.
The other woman.
Yeah, it's a different thing. And of course, in this kind of environment, it's not gender specific either. There was a time when I think when we were younger, and the phrase "ndogondogo" was always used, and it was all the time in respect of a lady. But now the reality is that it is different. It
goes both ways.
Yeah. I think when we talk about it in relationships, and particularly the marriage relationship, you're talking about somebody who is effectively outside that marriage relationship, but acquires certain rights or is involved in a certain way with either one or both of the spouses.
Yes.
Some may not be third party, like for example, under our law, customary law recognizes what is called polygamy.
But aren't they third because they came later? Aren't they just
well, under the law, they actually are principles, just like the first one. They are principles, just like the first one. And well, I was having a very interesting conversation about this, or I was watching an interesting conversation about this, where people were saying, does our current practice of polygamy actually, is it actually consistent with what was there traditionally? And somebody was pointing out, well, you know, traditionally, before you took a second wife, you had to have the first wife. Actually, the first wife would be the one to go out and that kind of thing. Slightly different. But I think it's essentially somebody who is on the outside, whether it is somebody with whom there is an extramarital affair that's taking place, or in the case of a blended family, one of the parents has come in with a child, or both of them have come in with children, or children who are conceived in the course of a marriage relationship with other people. So I think it's really a person who is an addition outside the marriage relationship and who has almost rights, well, not I think actually rights that would affect the people who are within the marriage relationship.
Basically, they get to a level where they cannot be ignored, you know? And
absolutely,
so your take on what an other person would be?
Particularly in the context, I think it's good to be here, Trix. In the context of marriage, it's someone other than your spouse or your partner that you have extra feelings or attachment to, and a level of involvement, whether emotionally, physically, or in any other way, and as you're saying, they cannot be ignored because they are contributing, and they are taking time, they're taking your time, they're taking your emotions, they're taking your thoughts, they're taking your finances, you know, out of the marriage. So that for me, that's what I consider the other party.
And most of the time, when the main person starts feeling that deficiency, that's when it now becomes a problem. Would you agree?
Yeah, that becomes a red flag. How you know that there's according to our topic for today, there's a side chick or a side guy, is when you find that perhaps your partner, they are no longer emotionally involved with you, or they are not moved emotionally towards you, because of course they're having an emotional involvement somewhere else. They don't give you as much time as they ought to, because they're sharing their time with someone else, and they're sharing you with someone else, or just trying to get to this person, you feel like there's a wall. You just can't get through this emotional wall. There's this blockage, and you can tell they are fantasizing, or on their phones they have put passwords. Some people say they can delete the texts, you know, or they
forever formatting their WhatsApp.
forever. Yeah, you can't access. You know, because there's something they're hiding from you, and they don't want you to know.
I think Reverend Nyakio would do well as an investigator. I mean, she's actually broken it down as to...
I've actually wanted to be an investigator in my
Wow.
life. Not just on a light note.
Right.
One of the things she's raised is the very first step in this whole question of the other person is disclosure.
Okay.
Are they known of? And we as lawyers interact with this matter often, particularly in the succession court, where somebody is deceased and then you're told, well, actually there is another family or there is another child elsewhere. Others, it's in the course of their lifetime that it's disclosed. Other times it is found out. And that's now what Reverend Nyakio is talking about, the red flags, where you're saying, it's not what it is. So the first step is the knowledge. Because we could be where one is in bliss and assuming everything is okay, but when in reality there is actually a third party. So I think the first step is knowing about it.
Yes, and knowing might be, as you've aptly put it, by accident or by just circumstances bring them to afloat and from wherever they are being hidden, or sometimes they present themselves because they feel they want some things. So often these people are there because they have been invited in, not because they were pushing their way in. So when this
there are some who push.
There are some who push for sure.
But you have to allow it. There's a level of permission that to permit someone to come into your life. It has to take you out.
Exactly. And so at this level, then they must be feeling they have a right to something. It could be wealth. It could be attention, or perhaps they want they have kids and they want this father to be present in their children's lives. Have you experienced this in your line of work as a family lawyer, and could you explain to us how it plays out?
Well, I mean, when the disclosure happens, principally you'll find that most times the disclosure happens is because there's now interests that are being pursued.
Yes.
It is rare that somebody will just say, hey, by the way, I just wanted you to know that we share that. It's not. I mean, you could look alike and that kind of thing, but everybody hopes that this hopefully no, that's not the thing. But when it does arise, it plays out in different forums.
Okay.
Take the example of a child maintenance matter as an example, right? Where somebody has a child outside of wedlock, and the other spouse is now making a claim for maintenance of the child, because under our law, both parents bear parental responsibility. So you have different reactions at that point. One of the reactions is, I deny, this is not my child. And that's when you start hearing about DNA testing and narrowing down. And sometimes we've seen this happening in very tough circumstances. Somebody has passed away, another person is alleging that this is this person's child. We have to do a DNA, so you actually have to get samples from the person who is now dead and then go and do the comparison. So the first one is likely people will either deny or at other instances people will say, okay, yes, but let's keep this on the down low. Let's keep it quiet, and because I don't want my other spouse to know.
My main spouse to
Then the reality is that from a perspective of what is prudent, it is unwise not to try and play it as a confidential matter, because inevitably, if it's a matter that goes to court, it's a matter that will be discovered. Inevitably, when you're doing your family budget at the end of the month, or if you do it in the quarter, if you're doing that, you'll realize that there's something that is leaking here. This is not a master's degree being pursued. There's something else that's going on here.
Right.
So we will finding it playing out more often than not in the courts, or sometimes somebody is represented by a lawyer and then stakes a claim and says this is the entitlement.
Reverend, what's the fallout, in your opinion, from the people that come to you? Have you experienced this, and what is usually their frame of mind? And I want you to go from the position of the third person or the main person trying to figure out how to handle this, because sometimes and often actually they feel they have a right to whatever they're trying to get. Even as the main person, you want your spouse back and this person cut off. The other person feels like they were invited in this situation and they have a right to stay and or at least get something out of that union. So what has been your experience with that? And this is something that has been covered in the papers. If we could get that story from yesterday, just to show people an angle to that as Reverend Nyakio breaks it down.
All right, so Normally, when maybe a husband is cheating and the wife comes, first of all, they're devastated, or they have gone. They're trying to process the emotion of discovering that your husband or your wife has cheated on you, and perhaps it was there all along.
Yeah.
And at times it's never someone very far. It could even be someone you've bumped into at the market, at the supermarket, and then this happens, and you're told this person. You discover this person. So at times you discover they have buried their heads in the sand, trying to ignore, but there comes a time when you cannot ignore it anymore. You have to deal with it. You have to bring it. It's on your face, and you have to deal with it. And so this particular person will come and say, how do I help my husband or my wife come back to me? You know, because of course there's trust that has been broken. There are many things that have been broken, you know, emotionally. Perhaps they have even gone beyond the level of emotional infidelity to being physical, you know, physical, perhaps with a product of as our lawyers would say, issues with a child, you know. And so they are broken. But we help them through the process by saying, it's important, even, I keep saying, even if in the midst of the process you're dealing with a wound, it's good to know, as I bring the parties together, I listen to the wife, I listen to the husband, and especially if they are willing to work through the situation. Half the time they are willing, but half the time it's only one person who's pursuing this relationship. And this, I want my husband back, I want my wife back. But you have to deal with the issue of what could have resulted to the adultery, what would have resulted to this other person gaining access to the heart of your spouse. And being able to deal with that issue, then you're able to help the person. If I discover it's because I never give my husband time, it's because I don't give him my conjugal rights, and that's why he discovered, hey, there's a side chick, I can go here and get it. How do you work towards that, you know, so that you're more available to your husband, you're more available to your spouse, you give them the conjugal rights, you know, you're giving them your time, your emotion, so that they don't find the void, because what happens is because there's a void, then they go out, they try to fill it outside. So we try to help them work through that process, because as I was saying, when there's a wound, if you just seal a wound and you shona a wound without dealing with the things inside, it will still come out again.
But Rev, take the example that we've had on the screen just a few seconds ago, whereby a woman discovered she had a co-wife in the obituary. So it's right there right now. So at the point that she's making this discovery, the man is gone. It's too late. How does one reconcile, you know, with this type of heartbreak? Because one, grief, and it often comes out, actually. Kids show up at the funeral. You have these relatives, phantom families coming to the surface at critical points where you can't even control or confront the person that has actually broken your heart or done this thing that is seen as infidelity or just a break of your loyalty.
So that, and there are many of those cases. You hear that at the burial, someone comes and says, I'm stopping this burial because this and so was my husband or my wife, or things like that. So in a situation like that, I would imagine what would be helpful for the person that is affected. Like, for example, the person who's affected in this situation is you have to say, this is the situation on the ground. This is it. Moving forward, how do I deal with this? How do I involve kind of reconciliatory, how do I reach out to this other person? Because at times they are out for property. They're here to mess you up, by the way. So you need to find out, is this the truth on the ground? And once you have discovered that, how do I work towards it? If there are children involved, then I'm sure there are times they involve lawyers, and they say the lawyer has to come in and things like that, because again, had your husband left a will, so how do we go about the process of that? You know, there are a lot of issues on the ground. But the truth of the matter is that you're grieving a husband, and then here are things that are popping up. So it even makes you become angry. People become angry. You become angry, you're resentful, you're thinking, how could he have done this when we were together? Maybe you never saw it, or maybe you saw it and ignored it.
Or you didn't know the extent at which this thing was.
And you know, Trix, I mean, these are wonderful points that Reverend Nyakio is raising. Allow me to point out that one of the challenges that, I mean, like this kind of advert, it's a problem even for you guys who are in media. Standard newspaper wants to put up an advert, an obituary. They put it up. A few hours later, another person has come with the same obituary with a different list
line of
dependents. And you're like, okay, so what will we do before we put on our adverts? Will we be asking people to give us marriage certificates before we put out obituaries and that kind of thing? So it's very, very problematic as far as it goes. Our perspective as lawyers who are involved in matters to do with succession, but more importantly, estate planning, is that this kind of scenario is a result of failure to think through the interests of those who will be left behind. And when I say think through, it is legally think through to make sure that what you leave is a situation that is clear.
But then not everyone lives to be 90 and wrinkled. Some people, death is sudden. So
and that's true. But we do tell people, in fact, one of the things that we've been telling people about writing wills, you know, you have about 3 major hindrances to people writing wills. They say, one, superstitiously, I'm calling death on myself. You know that if, why are you killing me? You know, that kind of thing. Secondly, the idea that it's only people with a lot of resources who can do a will, which is not true. And you know, the problem with that mentality tricks is that you carry it on. You start in your 20s, you're in a bed sitter, you probably only have a bed, a stool, maybe a small cooker. Then you say, I don't have enough. Then you upgrade a bit. And you never get to the point where you think that I have enough. You're waiting to that mirage point in time. A third thing is that people think that it's expensive and hard. What we have found is that it requires, especially where you have circumstances such as this should be a clear trigger that you need to put your affairs in order. Is that by being very deliberate in terms of documenting the various things. For example, with respect to children who are born outside wedlock, we have what are called parental responsibility agreements, where it is very clear. I mean, parental responsibility agreements have got aspects of how will we support this child financially, what will the access look like, who will have custody of the child, who will take decisions on the child's fate, what will happen over holidays. And when you clarify that, of course you can't reduce everything into writing, that creates a level of clarity. But in the will, disclosing all the people who could be beneficiaries. Because I want to point out to you that under Kenyan law, the Law of Succession Act, specifically Section 29, the term dependents is so wide, and the nature of it is that if you leave out one of the people listed there, they are entitled to make an application to court specifically to be provided for.
And that they be
and people do 2 things. Either they ignore those ones who are outside there, or they say, I'm not writing a will because if I write a will, I'll have to face my sins.
Yes, of course. I think it's denial at some point, because if I have to put it down, then that actually basically maps up my life's, mess-ups and things like that. So we are basically hiding from the...
The watchwords, insofar as the third party goes, are basically openness, okay, and proactivity. That really is it. Openness and proactivity, because otherwise then you're essentially kicking the can down the road, as they call it, and having to face a challenge going forward. And even people, including the standard group, with a problem to determine whose obituary will we publish.
And obviously it's uncomfortable for everyone involved. Rav, when you see that type of thing, and these are mature people down the lane, even you would be at a loss as to how to handle this particular issue. How do we then avoid this? Because he has given the legal perspective. How do we avoid getting so far down the line where we're dealing maybe with people in their 60s? I mean, it's unenviable being in that position. How would we avoid this?
My approach would be, how would you be able to affair-proof your marriage or your relationship?
But let's say it's happened.
It has happened. Okay.
And there's like 3 kids outside wedlock.
Yes. How do you go about it?
Because you were trying to avoid hurting people when it's too late. Maybe at the funeral stage or later on in life, where they discover things are just popping up, because eventually they do. So how do you plan for such an eventuality? Because while they have made the mistake, it doesn't mean that they're evil or whatever. There needs to be a sort of reconciling of reality and
For me, my take would be that if you discover this has happened, and your spouse is willing to talk about it. Of course, it's a process. And at some point, we have had to counsel people through the process because it's very easy. It's not easy to get to that place of acceptance that I thought I'm the only person in this relationship, and then you discover there is another family. At times people discover there are even other two families. Yes. You know, so how do you go about it? And maybe perhaps you are the first, you are the one, you arrived first here, so you feel this is rightfully mine. It's not an easy process, and people go through a lot of processing of emotions. You're hurt, you're angry, you're in denial. Some people at times may even decide to walk out, but we encourage Apana, you have been here. This is your spouse, but this is the reality on the ground. So I would say the person, if you discover the person is having other children, they need to take responsibility over their children. They have sired out there because that's their blood. Sure. They have to take care of the children, pay their school fees and things like that. They may not necessarily be involved with the other woman, but they must take care of their children. And I know people who have actually, this takes a lot of the grace of God to do this. They have actually said, let the children come and I'll take care of them. Because whether you like it or not, unless you leave and you allow this other person to take over, those are the children, and they are your husband's or your wife's children, and you must receive them. So that accepting, that being able to deal, that being able to take responsibility of what has happened helps a lot in the process.
Okay, so to avoid the impression that we're being too idealistic, we also have the African society, and Christianity tells us choose one, stick to that one, but then in reality we don't do that. So there's usually that tug of war between you having the temptation to have several other spouses, but at the same time maintain an appearance that you're a good Christian and you're following the doctrines. So what is your take on that? Because I feel like a lot of people feel, well, people say tuoane tu, so they keep adding, but at the same time they're tagged on this other side where, and then I think that bit where you're trying to maintain that Christian-like image, you hide things under, you know, the table. What do you think about that?
The reality is that it's actually possible to stick to one husband and one wife. But is it possible that in the course of your relationship, maybe you have emotionally been attached to someone else? It is possible, and it has happened. It's just that you make a decision and you say, like when I'm taking people through the vow, when I'm wedding people, officiating a wedding, they make this vow and say, this is the husband or the wife of my choice. This is the choice I'm making. And we keep saying, this is the choice you have made. You have to stick with it. You have to work at it. The grass will always look green on the other side, but we always say, water yours, so that it can also become green. You know, work towards your relationship. Be accountable, have accountability, people, and it helps a lot because it is very easy. You go and you say, hey, man, like, hey, I saw this chick and I liked her. Hey, I'm feeling a katag in my heart. But if you share with someone else, then that it doesn't become a major issue. The other person will tell you, just that one. You have a good wife, stay at home. You know, that thing of being accountable. Of course, making time for your spouse, making sure that you're working towards your marriage, giving each other, being thoughtful. I read this book by Tim LaHaye about the 5 love languages of love. Just speaking the love language of your spouse, focusing, and also, but accountability really does help. When you say, hey man, I feel like I'm about to trip, please help me. Avoid that person. There's the story of Joseph in the Bible, and the Bible says that when he went to Potiphar's, he ran. When the wife was just coming, he ran. At times you just need to like physically run.
Get yourself out
delete
of the situation.
Phone, block the number, you know, and that would be very helpful.
Okay, so Chris,
so Trix, I just wanted to pick up from what Reverend Nyakio is saying, because we also need to acknowledge the situations, as you've rightly said, that arise. One, it must be clear, because we may be talking about the other party as if they're people on there, that kind of thing. But these people also have rights, all right? For example, if you have a child with somebody who is married, that person who is the biological mother, father of that child has a responsibility towards that child and needs to be held to account, whether it is through a mediated process under the auspices, hopefully, of a lawyer or a certified mediator, whether it's through the auspices of the children's department, whether it is through court, this person needs to be catered for. So that's a very important thing to know, that there are rights. It's not just the other party who's outside there. They are actually rights that they have as far as they go. Secondly, because a lot of characterization of some of these things is more, just because of the reality of our culture, it's more often the male who has transgressed, right? But we also have instances of ladies who have
that's true.
had extramarital affairs. And you've had these stories of people being told that men are raising children who are not their own, as far as it
people
goes.
People are
now,
even advised not to check.
Yes, you could have a heart attack as far as that goes. Now, in those instances, remember there is a document called the birth certificate. And actually, Justice Mumbi Ngugi, I think it was in 2016, 2017, made a decision regarding the inclusion of the father's name in the birth certificate. Now, for somebody who has that kind of situation and is tempted to put in the name of somebody who is not the biological father, so that when you're applying for passport, you don't have to answer why it is not your husband who is the father. I'd also like to caution that, because under law, falsifying or providing false information to a public officer is actually a crime. Right? So one needs
just
to
plead ignorance.
Well, you could plead ignorance. You could plead ignorance. It's a possibility to plead ignorance. But remember, by that time, you are answering a case before court number one at Milimani law courts. Well, that's more anti-corruption. So maybe Makadara or Kibera law courts, you will likely be answering those charges as far as that goes. So just to point out that even as we, and I wholly agree with Reverend Nyakio in terms of the approach and what should be counseled. Obviously, the Kenyan law recognizes marriages that allow for polygamy. Those celebrated under Islamic law allow for polygamy. Those celebrated under customary law.
Does our law accommodate this? Because there are people who actually just go out and get, many wives.
So what has happened is that the marriage law has become quite clear that unless a marriage is evidenced by a certificate, it's not a marriage.
I'm not chewing mirror like we were being told.
Well, I'm not chewing mirror.
Last year.
That's actually quite two tricks, because amongst the meru, the mirror is the first step. But even customary marriages, they are actually certificates being issued under customary. So the courts have, and you'll find this even amongst insurance companies, people are saying, no, we don't want the affidavits we used to have. Bring a marriage certificate. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the succession law has not caught up with that. Now, the succession law, it was a curious thing that was recognized in one of our judgments in years gone, talking about you're not a wife while this person is alive, but once he dies, you suddenly assume certain rights. So there's that curious inconsistency in our law.
Yeah, so nice warning right there. Don't go writing people's other names in certificates.
Yes, please don't.
There is an actual risk, legal risk to that. Now, Reverend, what would you say to people who are facing this problem as it is ongoing? If they know in the back of their mind there's a third party who is clearly perhaps comfortable, they're not going anywhere, they're happy as long as this person is providing on the side, and they fear that at the end of the day they might have to face this person in case their spouse dies, God forbid. What advice would you give them in terms of how to handle that?
That's for the side hustle.
No, the main person, there's a third party, they're clearly just comfortable knowing, with the knowledge that this other person is married, they're not going anywhere. How would you advise them to go about it?
For me, I would say with a lot of wisdom, approach your partner. A lot of wisdom to talk about it, because for as long as it's not out in the open, that's when those things will pop up at the barrier. When people come and say this and this is happening, you need to discuss about it, you need to talk about it and bring it to the front and say, this is it. And people you need to have a definition of terms. Who am I in this marriage? Who am I in this relationship? And because it has its own implications, it has its own financial implications. You wanted to move on ahead in life, but because the money was being diverted to this other family, you can't make progress. So all those kind of things. It's important to talk to your partner and find out, is this the reality on the ground?
And should divorce be an option?
For that,
opinion, yes.
For me, if I was the main person, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I don't want to leave. Let the other person go. Yeah, I would advocate. I believe in prayer. Let's pray. Let's pray. But talk about it. Talk about it, because you need to deal with it. It's happening. You have to process your emotions.
Okay. And I'd like to invite Mike, who is an OG, not in third parties, but in marriage. And I'd like you to give your opinion or perhaps ask another question.
First of all, it's good you put a disclaimer, not in third parties. So that's important, especially given the subject that you're talking about. But I think very valuable advice right there. But maybe the question would be, in a case where one is suspicious, how do you go about it without necessarily, and this, by the way, is not because of anything, but I've had friends who've come to me for advice. They're suspicious, but they don't want to rock the boat. But they have, questions drama. That they're wondering. You may cause unnecessary drama. Because here you are thinking that your spouse might be having a third party, but you have no proof, you have no evidence, but there's just that sixth sense. And ladies, normally are very good with the gut feel. So would you say gut feel is good to go with?
It's good to do your investigations without rocking the boat, I would say. But as I said, if you have a kind of relationship where you can talk to your partner, you can say, hey man, I'm feeling this and this, or what do you think? And I found, like, as I said about accountability, just having other couples that you can talk to, you can throw that disclaimer to the other husband and say, I'm feeling this kind of thing. Can you try and probe this for me? Yeah, it can help. It can help.
Right. I think because of time we'll have to wind up, but it's a subject that I think we could talk until the cows come home. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And well, to our viewers, we'd like to thank you for watching Morning Express. It's always a pleasure to host you. My name is Michael Gitonga. I take this opportunity to wish you a great and a fantastic and a productive day.
And I'm Trix Engado. Have yourself a